A fresh start. Claire had always hated silence. It was too easy to hear the echoes of things she didn't want to think about. Her ex-husband's cutting words, the distant laughter of old friends, and the crushing loneliness that had become her constant companion. When she saw the ad for the house, it felt like a sign. The photo showed a charming cottage tucked away in the woods, its white picket fence glowing in soft sunlight. It was cheap, unreasonably cheap, but Claire didn't ask questions. She was desperate for a change, and the house seemed to offer exactly that. The reality, however, was far less idyllic. By the time Claire arrived, the sun was hidden behind thick clouds, and the house looked tired, as though it had given up trying to impress anyone. The paint was peeling, the windows were streaked with grime, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. Still, Claire refused to let herself be discouraged. She was here for a fresh start, and she was determined to make it work. The uneasy welcome. As Claire unlocked the front door, the stale air hit her like a wall. It smelled faintly of mildew and something else she couldn't place, something metallic and sour. She spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking, trying to ignore the little things that bothered her. The way the floorboards creaked, even when she wasn't moving. The faint rattling sound coming from the pipes, and the persistent chill in the air despite the summer heat. By evening, she had settled in as best as she could. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on the couch, staring out the living room window at the rain-drenched yard. Her gaze drifted upward to the attic window. It was small and oddly placed, slightly off-center beneath the roofline. Even in the dim light, it seemed to gleam unnaturally, as though it were reflecting something that wasn't there. Claire frowned. "I'll have to clean that," she murmured, sipping her tea. But the thought of climbing into the attic sent a shiver down her spine. The first night. Claire woke suddenly, her heart pounding. She didn't know what had startled her, but the silence in the house felt oppressive. She lay still, listening. Then she heard it. A faint tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was coming from above her, from the attic. Claire sat up, clutching the quilt to her chest. "It's just an old house," she told herself. "Houses make noises." But this didn't feel like the random creaks and groans of an aging structure. It felt purposeful. She forced herself to get out of bed, grabbing her phone for light. The hallway was dark and cold, the air thick with the faint metallic smell she'd noticed earlier. The attic door was closed, but as she approached, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There were faint scratches around the doorframe, as though someone, or something, had been trying to get out. Her hands shook as she opened the door. The attic was pitch black, the beam of her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The tapping had stopped, but the room felt wrong. The air was heavy, and the shadows seemed to shift as she moved. Her gaze fell on the window. It was wide open, rain blowing in and pooling on the dusty floor. For a moment, Claire thought she saw something outside, a pale face watching her from the darkness. She slammed the window shut and backed out of the attic, locking the door behind her. The neighbor's warning. The next morning, Claire decided to introduce herself to her neighbor. She spotted him outside, tending to a row of flowers despite the lingering drizzle. "Hi," she called, waving. "I'm Claire. I just moved into the house across the street." The man looked up, his face lined with age and something else. Worry, perhaps. He nodded, but didn't smile. "That house," he said, his voice low. "You'd do well to leave it. Claire blinked. Why? What do you mean? The man hesitated, glancing around as though afraid someone might overhear. Strange things happen there, he said finally. Always have. The last family that lived there, they didn't stay long. Claire frowned. What kind of strange things? The man's expression darkened. The attic, he said simply. That window. People see things up there, things they shouldn't. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. What happened to the last family? The man shook his head. The boy disappeared. They said he jumped out that window, but... He trailed off, his gaze drifting to her house. You should leave before it's too late. The tapping returns. Claire tried to brush off the man's words, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. That night, she locked the attic door and pushed a chair in front of it for good measure. She was just starting to drift off when the tapping began again. It was louder this time, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Claire sat up, her heart racing. Then she heard something else. A soft creak, as though someone was walking down the attic stairs. No, she whispered, clutching the quilt. This isn't happening. The footsteps stopped outside her bedroom door. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door creaked open, and Claire screamed. She fumbled for her phone, but when she turned on the flashlight, the room was empty. The attic door was wide open. The chair she'd placed in front of it toppled over. The journal. The next morning, Claire decided she needed answers. She spent hours searching the attic, going through boxes of old belongings left behind by previous owners. In one of the boxes, she found a small leather journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with the messy handwriting of a child. They watch me through the window. They're always there, waiting. I told Mom and Dad, but they don't believe me. They said it's just my imagination, but I know the truth. The watchers are real. Claire flipped through the pages, her heart sinking with every word. The entries grew more frantic, the handwriting more jagged. They want me to watch too. They said if I watch, they'll leave me alone. But I don't want to watch. I don't want to let them in. The final entry was written in shaky letters. If you're reading this, it means they've taken me. Don't look at the window. Don't let them in. The faces in the glass. That night, Claire couldn't resist. She sat in the attic, staring at the window. She told herself it was just a story, that the boy's journal was nothing more than the product of an overactive imagination. But as the hours passed, the room grew colder. The shadows deepened, and the air seemed to hum with energy. Then she saw them. Faces pressed against the glass, pale and distorted. Hollow eyes stared at her, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Their hands clawed at the window, leaving streaks of frost on the glass. Claire scrambled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. The faces seemed to multiply, filling the window. And then, slowly, one of them began to push through. The final warning. Claire fled the house that night, leaving behind everything she owned. The neighbor found her the next morning, sitting on the side of the road, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "They're in the window," she whispered. "They're watching." The neighbor tried to comfort her, but Claire couldn't be calmed. She packed her things and left town that day, vowing never to return. But the house remained, and the attic window continued to gleam faintly in the darkness. And somewhere, deep within its walls, The tapping began again.